I'm going to start my talk by quoting Donald Cuthbert, who's a famous art historian and art critic. And Donald wrote something that he said, "If ripeness is all, then Stuppin's art has ripened into innocence. His art is a child's vision of nature, reminding us of Baudelaire's remark that genius is childhood remembered at will. The sun may have set, but the moon is brighter than ever." And Donald Cuthbert and I were classmates at Columbia, but we didn't know each other at Columbia, and it's only the art that brought us together. And the painting right behind me is a scene of the lawn of Frederick Church's estate up near Hudson, and a smaller version of that painting was in the museum show here entitled Paint Box Leaves. And my New York gallery, ACA, sold that painting at an art fair in Miami some years ago. And I'm going to move down to the next scene. This painting is entitled Catskill Pink Moon. One thing that influenced my art was when I was in the Marine Corps, I spent 14 months in Japan, and I took an Ikebana class, thinking that was a way I might meet a Japanese lady that wasn't a bar girl. And well, I ended up getting a diploma in Ikebana. And Ikebana is based on 3 parts: heaven, earth, and man. And that 3 parts kind of influenced my painting in the sense that I use odd numbers of colors. You know, it's either 1 or 3 or 5 or 7. And I don't know, it kind of gives the painting a childlike innocence. When I start to paint, I have no idea what the painting's going to look like when I'm through with it. In fact, I used to say I paint by making one mistake after another. My wife said, "No, it's not one mistake after another. It's like you're taking a journey and you're making one discovery after another." And sometimes when I make a discovery off on one side of the painting, I have to go back and change what I thought was a good part over here. So it's like Donald Cuthbert says, I have a child's view of nature. And I never know what the painting's going to look like until it's done. And I grew up here in Yonkers, New York, and the Palisades were the end of my world. As a child, I didn't know that there was anything west of the Palisades. The Palisades was where the weather came from. And now I live at the edge of the Pacific Ocean. So I have another edge of my world. I had a show some years ago at Columbia School of Fine Arts, and the man that was head of the painting department, his name was Alan Hacklin. And Alan invited me to his home to paint. And I did at least 3 plein air paintings, maybe 4, and this is based on one of the plein air paintings I did at Alan Hacklin's house. I start and do a small painting on plein air and take a photograph of the scene, and with that small plein air painting and the photograph is what these bigger ones come from. When I was a child, I had drawing lessons at a lady's house at the edge of the woods in Yonkers. And I sat at her dining room table painstakingly copying reproductions of other people's pencil drawings. And it got to the point where I developed a skill in draftsmanship. And she then set up little still lifes, and if I could see it, I could draw it. And when I went to Columbia, I had 18 hours of solids, and I took a 3-hour painting and drawing class in the School of Fine Art. The instructor's name was Peppino Mangraviti, and in the 30s, Peppino was a big deal in the art world. Every major museum in the country had one of his paintings. Many of them have been deacquisitioned. Well, Peppino got to me at the end of the first 3-hour class, and when he got to me, I had a well-developed drawing on newsprint pad in charcoal of a model, and that's the first time I ever saw a model. But the drawing was very realistic. Peppino walked around the easel, put a big X in my drawing, and said, "You're a jackass. You're a human being. You have a mind, you have a soul, you have a heart. Why do you do what an inanimate object like a camera does better?" So he challenged me not to draw things so realistically. There's an art historian, Barbara Novak, taught at Barnard, and when she saw my show, she invited me to lunch at the faculty club. She asked about my training, and I told her the story I just told you. She reached across the table, put her hand on my arm, said, "He did the same thing to me. That's why I'm a historian and not an artist." So I didn't know enough to be a historian. So I just wanted to make the art. So anybody else have a question? So somebody over here?
What materials are you using?
What?
What materials are you using?
These are oil paints and varnish on top of them.
How do you get the 3D effect?
Huh?
How do you get the 3D effect?
How do I get the three? Well, I guess I put a lot of texture in the paint.
Jack, you've talked about an Ikebana class influencing your work. Could you tell us about that Ikebana class?
Well,
And how that changed your painting?
so here's 3 red spots. There's red there, red there, red there, and it just works for me. It's a silly discipline that I put into my work. It's like Donald Cuthbert says, I have a child's view of nature.
How did you do the painting so long?
This painting probably took me 2 or 3 months.
Oh, you know what she meant? How large? How do you work on such a large piece?
Well, I work on it with a brush. I've been very blessed in life with a lot of luck. I had no school major. I had studied no business. I ended up helping start 6 companies, 5 of which were successful, and meeting Masha was a successful thing. And I think she does a wonderful job here at the museum. When I was growing up, the Hudson River Museum was the old mansion next door. And this is a wonderful space to display art. And yes, Masha.
Can I ask another question related to your work with the Sonoma 4?
What's that?
She's going to ask a question about the Sonoma 4.
Oh.
Can you tell us about that group? And
Well, I bought a house in western part of Sonoma County, and the the house had been built by Charles Schultz, the cartoonist, and in the kitchen there was a space for a long, narrow table. And the local auction house had a table that fit that space just perfectly. And they had a high estimate on that table of $4,800. I bid $4,800, but the table sold for $48,000. And I said, heck, I can design a table that'll work there. And I had these deadfall trees, and I went looking for somebody with a sawmill. And I met a man by the name of Bill Wheeler. And Bill Wheeler was a famous hippie in Sonoma County. He had a ranch. He had 475 hippies living on his ranch until the county closed them down. Well, anyway, he was set up his sawmill and had a partner, Big Tom. And after he'd been working a couple of days, I walked down to the edge of the woods where he was, and as I approached, he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm an artist." He says, "I'm an artist." I said, "That's good." He said, "I studied at the Art Institute." I said, "So did I." He said, "I went to Yale." I said, "Well, I went to Columbia." And that was the first conversation. And I was calling Bill Wheeler because I didn't know different tradespeople in the area. I was so new to it. I was asking him for recommendations. He kept saying, "Let's go out and paint the landscape together." And I said, "Well, I hadn't painted the landscape since I was a teenager." And finally I said, "Okay, I'll go with you, but you promise it's the last time you ask me." Well, I went and I enjoyed it so much. And pretty soon there were 4 of us painting the landscape together. A man by the name of Bill Morehouse, who was in the Whitney in about 1958, started the art department at Sonoma State University. A man by the name of Tony King, who lived during the winter in New York City and showed with some good galleries like O.K. Harris and I forget the name of one of the other galleries. And the 4 of us were painting together 3 or 4 times a week together, starting in the morning and finishing at the end of the day. And we never looked at each other's work for 2 years. And then finally we decided we should look at each other's work, and we laid the paintings out against the fence, and you could tell it was the 4 depictions of the same scene, but the style of painting was so radically different. All 4 of us painted in our own way. And that actually gave us a currency. And we started to have some shows. And in 1992, we had a show with John Bergruen Gallery in San Francisco, which was and still is the best art gallery in San Francisco. And I decided that once that show was open, that it'd be kind of a downer. I mean, there was no up in galleries in San Francisco. And I talked the other 3 into let's paint our way across America, which created a funny tension. Bill Morehouse was on sabbatical. He wanted the trip to take forever. Tony King had just moved his family to Sonoma County permanently, and he wanted to get back to his family as quickly as possible because they just moved there. So there was a constant tension in the 4 of us the whole time. Anyway, we went from Yosemite to the coast of Massachusetts in 3 weeks. And Tony King had a friend that was a member of the Century Association in New York. And it's a private club, and I was aware of the Century Association. A lot of writers and publishers belonged to it, and I had no appreciation of their interest in the visual arts. Well, I called the head curator at the the Young Museum in San Francisco. I said, we're offered a show at the Century Association. He said, wow. And the show before us was Helen Frankenthaler, and the show after us was in memoriam of Robert Motherwell. So we were in good company. And it turned out that the Century Association has probably one of the best collections of Hudson River paintings that exists as a collection. In fact, they sold one painting and completely refurbished the Century Association with the proceeds of the sale. So we became, the local journalist there in Santa Rosa named us the Sonoma Four. And it was a good experience in the sense that we kept each other going, and we did have a modest amount of success. All of us at the Sonoma Four always thought of painting nature that should be preserved. And I have maybe 3 small paintings that have buildings in them, because I was trying to preserve the nature. And the same thing with these paintings. These are scenes that should be protected for all time. And hopefully they will be. When I was growing up in Yonkers as a teenager, I grew up in North Yonkers, and I heard about a young lady, another teenager, that lived on the other side of Yonkers, whose name was Chickie. And I never met Chickie in Yonkers, and I always wanted to meet a Chickie. And I married my wife, Diane, and I started to call her Chickie. And curiously, the only other person that ever called her Chickie was her father. And anyway, this painting, I was doing a plein air painting, and Chickie walked down to the Hudson River, and she's very athletic. And she walked back up while I was working, and she actually took the photo, but this painting is based on my plein air painting and Chickie's photo. So I named the painting Chickie's Hudson River. The painting, the vertical painting at the edge, there's Catskill Falls. And I also did a large painting of that that was about 10 feet tall. And it was hired by one of the most successful businessmen in the history of the United States, a billionaire, and he bought the big Catskill Falls painting and 6 other paintings of mine.
Jack, do you work on multiple paintings at one time, or are you committed to finishing one before you go to the next?
I usually work on probably 2 at a time, and I have a studio assistant, and she frequently puts a rough covering over a particular shape, and then I come along and change the color and correct the shape. And but it's gotten to the point where she can paint almost like I do. We've been working together since 2003. Somebody else have a question?
You have 3 clouds in many of these paintings.
Pardon me?
3 clouds. 3 clouds. 3 clouds here and there, another painting down there. Any significance in the 3 or those little clouds?
Again, it goes back to my Ikebana.
Oh, that's the idea of that. That makes sense.
Which is probably a very silly discipline, but it works for me. All the paintings have an odd number of colors. If they don't, I made a mistake.
You told us a story about clouds and how you had to learn to paint clouds.
Oh, yeah. When I started painting en plein air, I was terrified. I didn't know how to paint clouds or water. And when we did the cross-country trip, none of my paintings had clouds in them. I just kind of did a stylized halo over the scene, but it worked. But and I got to the point where I decided I had to learn how to paint clouds. So, and like I said, I originally said I paint by making one mistake after another, and my wife corrected me and said, no, you paint like you're on a journey and make one discovery after another.
You've mentioned in your life that you've been lucky. Could you share with everyone your military your military career and how you had a little luck intervene and how that might have impacted your career?
Well, when I graduated from Columbia, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and the Korean War ended when I was in college. Vietnam had not begun. I was only on active duty for 2 years because the Marine Corps budget got cut so dramatically after the Korean War that I only was on active duty for, like I said, 2 years. I spent 14 months of that 2 years in Japan, and I never heard a shot fired in anger. And for a Marine Corps officer not to have heard a shot fired in anger is lucky. You know, just everything in my life convinced me it's more important to be lucky than to be smart. Because everything in my life was nothing but by design. It was all by accident, including me painting the landscape. If I hadn't hired Bill Wheeler in the sawmill, I may never have painted the landscape again. So it's like Donald Cuthbert says, if innocence is anything, my innocence has ripened into childhood.
And Jack, how does it feel to be back? You've painted these paintings, you've been thinking about these scenes for a long time. How does it feel to be back in Yonkers in this scenery?
Well, Yonkers has changed dramatically, and for the better, in the sense it's far more inclusive than it was in my time. The population is more diverse, and I'm so happy to see that. It speaks highly of Yonkers that it welcomes diversity in its population. Getty Square doesn't look anything like it used to look like.
And the waterfront, right? The new waterfront.
And I wonder, one thing that was always happened in the spring was the poles were stuck in the Hudson River with nets stretched across to catch shadfish. Are they still doing that?
Not as much, no.
No.
But there's still, we actually have a wonderful painting here. These are shad fishermen. But the boat clubs are all active as ever on the Hudson. There's paddling clubs, sailing clubs, kayaking, all very much alive on the river. There's definitely a renewed interest in preserving it. So how do you feel in that big picture? The environment is such a major conversation.
Well, I think all my paintings are about the environment. I don't think of them really addressing climate change, except that I hope that the climate change does not ruin the landscape. And in West Sonoma County right now, climate change has ruined the landscape in that we've had horrible wildfires that have burned thousands and thousands of acres. And then I hope that some of these New York scenes don't get destroyed by climate change. But everything's vulnerable. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for being here and listening to my foolish rambling.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jack, for this personalized walkthrough of the beginning of my world. Thank you, everyone, for coming to join us. And for those of you who have not yet been able to join us, this amazing exhibition will be on view through January 2nd, 2022. So there's plenty of time to come and experience it in the context of other landscapes, landscapes in virtual travel, ideas about ecology and the Hudson River. So we welcome you back and welcome you back often. Thanks so much. And again, it is truly a joy to welcome a Yonkers native back. So thank you, Jack Stuppin.